very much for that, and good evening. It's an honor to address the Pearland Tea Party. I want to thank Jean Hall, who I met this afternoon for about 10 minutes, for her lead role in organizing this trip to the Houston area and for being such a great ally and host. And I also wish to express my gratitude to your VP, Pedro Rivera, for inviting me here. I extend to Pedro un abrazo fuerte, and thank you all for coming. Our country needs your moral clarity, your steeliness, and your feistiness as never before. This is going to have to be our finest hour. Our opponents in the battle over immigration have enormous resources. But more significantly, they have a luxury that we do not have. They can suffer any number of defeats and remain in the fight. If we lose one battle in Congress over comprehensive immigration reform, we could lose the war. We fight with our heels on the edge of a precipice. With regard to some historic policy disputes, one can always say, same enemies, same friends. That's no longer the case with immigration. Things have changed a great deal in recent times. When we defeated the last attempt to pass comprehensive immigration reform, and that was Senate Bill 1639 in June of 2007, things were different. We could count on strong GOP House support under Denny Hassford, many more Senate Republicans, and Blue Dog Democrats. As we prepare for the next potentially decisive battle, we have to recognize that the Republican National Committee is on the other side. The GOP House leadership has betrayed us. Many GOP senators have gone over to the other side, and Blue Dog Democrats are an extinct species. The GOP establishment has declared war on you, on the Tea Party. The odds against us are greater, longer, which means we have to be a great deal more tenacious. Our greatest ally now, as in 2007, is the American people. They beat the entire establishment then, and they can do it now. But that will not happen unless you work tirelessly to keep them awake and vigilant, and remind them that the great decisions about our national life are theirs to make. The American people sometimes forget that they have awesome power, and that this country still belongs to them. It's your job to remind them. Now, following that homily, and before beginning in earnest, I've got a story to tell. It gives me pause because it's very applicable to me as a man who admittedly likes to speak at epic length. Since I spent my first career in academia for 25 years, I'm going to locate the story in that setting. A visiting scholar comes to a small college to speak to its history department, and by all appearances, the talk has gone very well. During the reception afterwards, an aged retired faculty member comes up and gruffly tells him, "You talk too long." Now, 3 minutes later, the same guy comes back and says, "And you were boring too." A speaker has not succeeded in fighting his way to the wretched and pertinent white wine, the inedible, tasteless cheddar, and the stale Ritz crackers, when the same guy comes back one more time and says, "I disagree with everything you said." The speaker is now feeling fairly deflated. The dean, who was invited in, has overheard all of this and comes up to give the speaker consolation. He says, "I'd hate for you to think that that rude guy is representative of this college. Don't let him bother you. His opinions mean nothing. Everyone here knows he's dead wood, an imbecile. In fact, many of us think that he's borderline demented. How do we know that? Because all he ever does is repeat what everyone else says." Now let's cut to the chase. To paraphrase the great Samuel Johnson, it will concentrate our minds wonderfully if I make my biggest point first. An amnesty combined with a massive increase in low-skilled immigration is the paramount issue facing America. No other policy has equal capacity to transform our country. None other has the capacity, literally, to unmake America. What we do about it is the most significant decision we will make in our lives. We have to preach to our fellow Americans that they should not think about what was good for their great-grandparents or their grandparents or their parents. In my case, both of my parents. I'm a first-generation American. They should think about what's good for their grandchildren. We have to free Americans from the delusion that immigration is an absolute good, regardless of scale or historical context. The fundamental purpose of immigration policy is so mischaracterized by the media, the White House, the Gang of Eight, the Democratic Party, the GOP House leaders and their supporters, immigration activists, academics, and deadhead people in religion, that it's critical to understand and stress what ought to be self-evident. Like all social policy, our judgment of immigration rests on the extent to which it serves the national interest at a given historical moment. And that interest is the greatest good of the greatest number of American citizens and legal residents, full stop. Its impact or benefits to legal immigrants is secondary. Its impact on illegal aliens lies completely outside the realm of American moral or legal responsibility. It is not a concern whatever. Civic loyalty does not encompass foreigners that break and thwart our laws and scam our system. In the terms that Aristotle employs in the Ethics, immigration is an activity, not a result, an instrumentality, not an end. It's value neutral. The goal we seek, the good end, is a just, democratic, humane, prosperous, orderly society. Immigration may help or hinder our reaching that depending on circumstances. What's at stake in this debate? Our most basic values, allegiances, and interests. Our very political culture hangs in the balance. Our national security, sovereignty, the separation of powers, preserving the power that the Constitution grants we the people, and opposing its theft by the financial and political elite. Maintaining our political liberty through a two-party political system and preventing America from becoming a one-party state with the tyranny and corruption that would bring. Sustaining our faith in and reliance on the rule of law. Upholding the dignity of American labor. Preserving our social cohesion through the balance we have struck between the rich variety of our cultural and identities and our various roots and a larger sense of national belonging conveyed by the iconic phrase, de pluribus unum. Preventing the emergence of a dual culture, dual language society that is a formula for permanent division and social strife from Canada to Lebanon to the Balkans, and protecting the endangered social safety net. Also at stake is sane population growth, environmental sustainability, and guaranteeing that the experience of solitude in the sublime natural landscapes bequeathed to us by the Almighty will be vouchsafed to our children and their descendants. Getting immigration right will also help policymakers think in more realistic terms about America's relationship to the Third World. One premise is critical. We cannot repair the Third World by bringing it all to America. Arguably, most at stake is our faith that America's destiny is ours to make. Determinists and libertarians claim we can't control immigration. They sound clever, but they're wrong. This dysfunctional system isn't an unavoidable concomitant of globalization or the expression of some unseen historical law. It didn't evolve by accident. Nothing this bad could have happened by accident. Our ostensibly broken system is in fact a very clever scheme for promoting the interests of those who have created it behind closed doors. America's corporate service sector and the agribusiness lobby and the members of Congress they own, lock, stock, and barrel. The Chamber of Commerce, several U.S. administrations, Mexico's corrupt government, the ethnic lobbies led by the Hispanic one that's comprised of tiny leadership cadres supported by the elitist Ford Foundation, the mainstream U.S. media, big religion, with its childish universalism and calculated eagerness to fill empty pews, academia and America's post-nationalist billionaire foundation culture. Our immigration policy is about corporate and personal greed, political power, identity politics, post-nationalist ideology, and sectarian interest. It is not about social justice, unless you believe it is inherently ethical to rob Peter to pay Pablo. We'll scrutinize the Gang of Eight's draft bill, S744, because it's the establishment's policy template on both sides of the aisle. They're all the same. Irredeemably flawed, it amounts to a plot against America. especially our most vulnerable citizens. Then there is the abominable GOP variant. By the way, it was originally called the Texas Solution. And I fought in the same room with Norm Adams and Bill Price against this.
Yes.
You're lunatics that you have in this state. The leadership took
Bob Price.
Bob Price, yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was at a meeting of the Spirit of Freedom Women, and Mr. Dewhurst was there as well. I was very impressed by him. He has the sort of the look of a guy who would have built the Three Stooges out of their inheritance. Anyway, the Republican bill would legalize the 11 or God knows how many millions of illegal aliens, but it wouldn't make them citizens or give them political rights. It would import tens of millions of low-skilled workers under the same conditions. This is an ugly scheme, and it is anti-American. It is un-American. It is un-American to create a class of helots, of wage slaves without rights, and enshrine that in law. In the states of the former Confederacy, that evil lasted for decades under the shameful law of Jim Crow. We mustn't allow its revival. Fat cat Republicans want it back. The GOP ploy, by the way, is as stupid as it is short-sighted and immoral. In no time flat, there will be a triumphant national movement steered by the Democratic Party to grant citizenship to everybody who's been brought here supposedly as a guest worker. In fact, as you know, we have never had a guest worker policy in America because guest workers go home, right? Our guest workers don't go home. I believe most of the GOP, by the way, understands this. It's a stealth amnesty. It's another stealth amnesty they're pushing. Like the greedy and myopic capitalism in one of Lenin's favorite aphorisms, the GOP leadership will happily sell you the rope with which you can hang them. Though the GOP tries denying it, there's a civil war in the Republican Party over immigration, among other things. Comprehensive immigration reform has the support of the GOP National Committee, of course, many in the Senate, the House leadership. They backed down, at least publicly, at the infamous retreat in Maryland because they didn't have the numbers. They also appeared to grasp, at least momentarily, that they would likely snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in the midterm elections if they alienate their base over immigration. But keep a sharp eye. The leadership wants a deal to make service sector donors happy. Boehner is meeting quietly with Senator Schumer, and they're meeting with the president. There will be a furious battle over this plank, certainly in the 2016 election, if not before. Immigration, by the way, was a sideshow at the recent CPAC meeting. And by the way, this was a conservative meeting? Conservative by what definition? Every panel was packed with amnesty supporters. As my boss, Mark Krikorian, wrote in the corner at National Review, quote, what with Grover Norquist's ongoing push to suppress pro-sovereignty voices on this issue, this year's panel on immigration is straight pro-amnesty agitprop. We're likely okay for the midterm elections. Few GOP House members have an incentive to pass pro-amnesty legislation. Their base despises it, and it has no desire to give Obama a legacy. Few outside of GOP survivors in California have enough Hispanics in their districts to worry about. But my paranoia lingers. Boehner is the most inept, weakest, and unhappiest speaker in House history. He might resign, devoting more time to his tanning bed and making a fortune as a K Street lobbyist rather than remaining a piñata for House conservatives. That would mean the pledge to obey the Hastert rule is null and void. GOP leadership and other influential Republicans might cobble together a bill and do something insane, a conference with the Senate. Whatever compromise is made will be set in stone, and House Republicans will be willing tools of Senate Democrats who will outsmart them at every turn. Of course, the smart thing is to do nothing. Refuse the conference. Nothing is infinitely preferable to passing an amnesty followed gigantic waves of low-skilled immigration. That cure is far worse than the disease we have somehow managed to survive for 50 years. Adopting anything like Senate proposed bill S-44 is the policy equivalent of allowing a cancer to metastasize. The right policy is restoring the rule of law through attrition through enforcement, combining strict border control with internal enforcement to encourage illegal aliens to leave. It works, and we have the data to show it. My think tank has the data to show it. Romney supported self-deportation, but he never explained it. A man with no fire in his belly. He was unable or unwilling to make a winning red meat populist argument. He would have carried Ohio if he had made that argument, but he just couldn't make it. There is no divine, civil, or human right to immigrate to America. It's equally axiomatic that mass immigration by low-skilled workers to a post-industrial economy and a knowledge-based society where upward mobility is entirely dependent on education and which supports a huge welfare system is ruinous and socially dangerous. During the great waves of immigration from Europe from the 1840s to the early 20th century, immigration made a mighty contribution to America because our country was a very different place. We were the losses of the world, the equivalent of 5 China, with millions and millions of jobs that provided upward mobility. We needed millions of small farmers to feed millions of new mouths, and we had an empty continent to fill. Just 100 years ago, 90% of the workforce was involved in the primary economy, growing and distributing food, 90%. Today, 90% is in the service sector. We needed low-skilled workers then, as well as medium-skilled workers, as well as high-skilled workers. That world is gone. And with it, the need for millions of uneducated workers who are an immense drain on the economy. There was no welfare during the Great Waves. This is very important to understand. The Great Waves ended in 1923, and welfare began with old age pensions in 1935. So no one came to this country during the Great Waves to get welfare. It didn't exist. Now welfare, along with better paying jobs, is a magnet for immigration. The U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform under President Clinton, headed by Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, very, very good commission, produced a report in 1995 that said, end low-skilled immigration forever. Okay? Clinton didn't listen because some Asian businessman gave him several $100 million. Simple as that. Contemporary, hard-working, would-be Mexican citizens aren't different in very many respects from people during the Great Waves. The big change is in us, in what America has become. That is, in a way, the tragedy is that there's a misstep, a huge misstep, between what we have become and who they are. The skills and education they bring belong to the last century. Let me stress that focusing on Mexico has nothing to do with anti-Mexican hostility or, for God's sake, anti-Hispanic bigotry. The focus is unavoidable for the same reason that Willie Sutton robbed banks. That's where they come from. Mexico's position in the hierarchy of immigrants is so stratospheric that if we took the next 8 sending countries and combined them, it wouldn't come close to the total we get from Mexico. So how did we get here? Why are there 12 to 20, 30, I don't know, million illegal aliens living amongst us? How do we explain the administration's handcuffing the immigration supervisory agencies to prevent their arresting and deporting lawbreakers have no right to be here? Why do the fiscal and political elite want to expand that number exponentially? S744 repeats all the errors and offers all the same empty promises of, let us remember, 8 previous amnesties. We've had 8 amnesties. Each spawned another tsunami of illegal immigration because the promised enforcement never happened. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me 8 times, and I start getting very angry. We can't plead ignorance. We have watched this movie 8 times. Our borders are open because the establishment wants it that way. And by the way, one thing I would say, footnote, is we're going to need a whole lot more research down the line about how much the establishment is making money off the Mexican cartel drug trade. Right. Okay? If you take one guy, El Chapo,
when he was arrested, and he had $500 billion in cash in his house. And we know that every civil society organization south of the border is corrupt. You don't think you're in business with folks on the other side of the border?
Yeah.
And I mean cops, border patrol, judges, senators, congressmen, trust me.
Yeah.
There's a big story about this. The narcotics trade is as rich as the oil industry. You have to understand what we're talking about. The CBO estimated that S744, by the way, would reduce illegal entry by a mere 25%. Then it upped it a couple of points after the passage of the phony Corker-Hoven amendment designed to cover the backsides of Republicans by promising all these sci-fi measures that everyone knows will never be implemented. All the comically detailed provisions of the so-called border surge are carefully articulated in the language of that bill as goals, not requirements. Therefore, none has to be met before illegal aliens can be legalized. The logic of the bill is simply astounding. If none of the enforcement goals are met, rather than go back to the drawing board and come up with something logical, we proceed immediately to legalization. Every enforcement provision in that bill is subject to the final disapproval of the Secretary of Homeland Security. We have a new one now. I mean, if Janet Napolitano wasn't bad enough, we have Jed Johnson, a former Pentagon lawyer with no experience in immigration or law enforcement. The executive branch can amend, narrow, replace, or eliminate enforcement by presidential veto, court rulings. Senator Leahy tipped the Democrats' hand when he called all of the gimmickry a Christmas gift to Halliburton. If amnesty were to pass, it is a safe bet Democrats will lose all interest in the border and all interest in enforcement. A succeeding Congress, by the way, is bound by nothing. It can renege on the entire deal. Budget cutters will find the $30 billion earmarked for the border irresistible. Money for the gizmos ranging from underground sensors to drones, and hiring another 20,000 Border Patrol agents will be sticking up like a nail, begging to be hammered, and it will be hammered. Senator Corker, who insisted on the gizmos, now says his bill was overkill. And the sleazy Senator McCain now says the surge isn't necessary. Forget the bogus amendment and the retractions. There are real concerns. The Union of Border Patrol Agents says there is no way to train, and more importantly, there is no way to vet potential border agents in anything like the time that they're talking about. The Border Patrol, it is very distressing to say, has been deeply infiltrated by the Mexican drug cartels. That is a publicly known fact. Its quick expansion, let's pretend that they were serious about expanding it, would be accompanied by the Achilles heel of all amnesties, inadequate background checks or no background checks, to screen out criminals and terrorists. Most indicative of bad faith is the wildly counterintuitive sequencing of the bill's components. First is irrevocable legalization, and only later promises of a plan for border security and internal enforcement. It would take years to get the pretend gimmickry up and running. By then, the horse will be long out of the barn. Even if the bill actually cut immigration by an inconceivable 50%, I'm just pulling that number out of the air, we will be debating another amnesty in a decade. The CBO estimates that the bill will be so ineffectual in stopping illegal immigration, we will have approximately 7.8 million additional illegal aliens and their children, many born here, anchor children within 10 years. The American people aren't stupid. It's the suspicious sequencing that has caused 2/3 of them in recent polling to register strong opposition to immigration reform. I could talk about polls till the cows come home. I wrote a very long paper on this subject during the 2008 election. All of the polls on immigration that you read in mainstream media, that you read in the CBS New York Times, They are all push-polls. They are all phonies. They all present false dilemmas. None of them are credible. None of them. Now, a quick tour of the historical background. Massive low-skill, legal and illegal immigration began with the grotesquely misconceived Nationality Act of 1965. That bill was not intended to increase immigration. And by the way, the bill's supporters, including the New York Times, and the man who shepherded the bill through the Senate, the young Teddy Kennedy, swore up and down that it wouldn't do that. Now there's a case to be made, I'm trying to be kind to these people, that they didn't see it clearly because they were so stuck in an old paradigm, they couldn't see a big shift occurring. They were stuck in an East-West, communist, Soviet Union versus the free world thing. They didn't look north-south. I mean, today, if we all think about the world in the widest terms, we talk about failed states, successful states. We understand the north-south divides in a way are much more important than any east-west divides are. I mean, the east-west divides are gone. I mean, Crimea is a joke. All right, I mean, let's not even go there. So their radar wasn't calibrated at all to pick up data. So they didn't notice, for example, that Mexico's population had doubled in the previous 80 years, or that the longest border on Earth between a first world economy and a third world economy is between the United States and Mexico. By the way, people wonder, why was this bill passed in 1965? I said this bill had nothing to do with increasing immigration. Anyone want to take a guess? Play a little history quiz here. What happened in 1964? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be doing this. The Civil Rights Act passed. Okay, and in response to the Civil Rights Act, there were tremendous acts of vile, hideous, racist stuff that went on. The little girls were blown up in the church in Birmingham, Alabama. America looked terrible into the world. This bill was PR. That's what it was all about, making America look better. I will only add, by the way, that in 1965, it wasn't this. Not only did this idiot bill get passed, but that was the year that the Tonkin Resolution got passed. The Vietnam War began, and America never looked worse. Okay, so try to improve. Hey, the fates are not going to treat you kindly. Despite all the assurances we got from the New York Times, which, by the way, called everyone who said that they were wrong a bigot, within 2 years, immigration quintupled. It didn't just grow, it didn't quintupled. And we started getting something we had never seen in this country before, large-scale illegal immigration. Within 3 years, we started getting about 500,000 a year as immigrants in 1965 began to establish social and economic networks. For decades, we have imported 2 million people annually, about half illegal. That's 2 cities the size of Philadelphia. Human beings have lived in North America, most anthropologists, geologists, paleontologists, for about 13,000 years, since the Pleistocene Ice Age. That's when there was no, the land masses of Asia and North America were connected. There was no Bering Sea. So at one point or another, a hunter from Asia crossed over into Siberia. That was the first person to come. And they think this about 13,000 years ago. Now think about this. In all of that time, fully 1/3 of the people here came after and as a direct consequence of the Immigration Bill of 1965. 1/3 in 13,000 years. Okay. Really bad legislation can produce gigantic problems. Federal malfeasance is the other factor. One administration after another abandoned the rule of law, betraying U.S. sovereignty and countenancing massive illegal entry. No other country in the world that is not a failed state is so cavalier about the integrity of its borders as the United States of America. It is shameful is painful to say and shameful to know. And we have very legitimate national security concerns. You know, I've been emphasizing the problem, and I'm going to talk about it more, about low-skilled immigrants and what it's going to be doing to our workforce, what it's going to be doing to our social and economic system. But let's talk about security. I listened to the former director of DHS, Ira Chertoff, speaking at Yale Law School in 2006. DHS was then estimating that 40,000 people, so-called OTMs, other than Mexicans, that come across the border, are from countries on the terrorist watch list. We are getting 40,000 Muslim jihadists coming into this country across the Mexican border. Hezbollah is in bed with the Venezuelan government. The cartels are in bed with Muslim terrorist organizations like Hamas. You know? They are, by the way, they do drug deals together as well. And there is an area, I'm sure some of you know about, the so-called TBA, the tri-border area in South America. It's where Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina meet. It is home to a diaspora community of nearly 5 million Muslims. It's a hop, skip, and a drop. Every Muslim terrorist organization, whether it's from South Asia or the Middle East or Central Asia, is located in the tri-border area. It is a hop, skip, and a jump up to the border, and then border crossing is done in connection with the cartels. By the way, there are no longer any independent contractors as coyotes. All of the border is controlled by the cartels. Okay? They are completely in control of the border. So our borders are threatened by people who have sworn to destroy us and our way of life. These are the Muslim jihadists. And by the way, the drug cartels has set up a whole range of infrastructure on our side of the border, in Texas, in Arizona, and elsewhere. Munitions, money, supply, all sorts of drop places for drugs of various kinds. There are signs 70 miles north of the border in Arizona telling Americans they shouldn't travel. What has happened to us? I mean, this is our country, yes? We can't walk every inch of our own country without being worried about our border security? I mean, this is madness. The executive has, in essence, staged a coup against Congress and we the people by arrogating to itself the power to make immigration law, and that's a power that the Constitution grants only to Congress, and to circumvent Congress on immigration. Obama has resorted to executive orders throughout his presidency. That's what he falls back on, including passing his own version of the DREAM Act by paroling 1.7 million potential beneficiaries. You know, presidents have the power to parole a certain number of people whose status in the immigration system is, you know, there's a question mark. But we're usually talking about a handful of people. This is 1.7 million people. And since misdemeanors tend to lead to felonies, now those pushing for amnesty are exhorting Obama to exponentially increase the number to whom he's granted sanctuary by edict. Last Friday, the president asked the DHS to come up with a more compassionate plan. I'm thinking, compassionate for whom? Brace yourselves. The House just voted a bill saying the president's power to do these things should be curtailed. I hope, I pray, we are on the course for an impeachment. But who's got the guts to do it? I can only think of, quite frankly, the senator from Alabama, Jeff Sessions. I can't think of anyone else, quite frankly, who's got the stature, the standing, and the wisdom to raise this issue. This president should be impeached. We can identify, by the way, when this lawless regime went on steroids. It was in July, during the election campaign. It's when Obama's political handlers noticed that he had undergone a rather sharp decline in approval ratings in the Hispanic community. Now, the approval ratings were still higher than they were among other American groups, but he had been, at that point in the previous election, he was getting a 75% approval rating. This time around it was something like 54. So they were nervous. So they swung into action, deciding to put the Constitution in the garbage can. Immigration judges and prosecutors were granted so-called prosecutorial discretion, that is to say, code language for ending law enforcement. ICE was ordered to stop making arrests of a very curious kind of species of person we have in America, and those are law-abiding illegal aliens. I love those oxymoronic creatures. There are some of the things those law-abiding illegal aliens do. With that act, Obama did something which is so horrendous, I don't know how to overstate it. He transformed constitutional and statutory law, which is the basis of our lives here, it's what makes America work, into what I would call prerogative law, where law enforcement is selective and is based purely on political criteria. You know you're in a very dangerous place. You go, it's a combination of dictatorship and anarchy, and that's what Obama's done. We're somewhere hovering. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, briefcase. We're hovering between dictatorship and anarchy. By the way, it's interesting. Richard Evans, don't bother this. Richard Evans, who is holds a chair at Cambridge University, is widely considered the greatest contemporary historian of the Nazi regime. It's a 3-volume magisterial set of books, which I've had the pleasure to read. Richard Evans says, if you could point to any moment during the ascent of the fascist party and the Nazi parties in Germany, it was when constitutional and statutory law were replaced by prerogative law. When the state took over and threw out the courts and threw out the Constitution and said, the law is what I determine it to be. That's when you know you have tyranny. And let's call things by their right names. Under this president right now, we are living with legal tyranny. It's a regime of legal tyranny. I am mighty tired of that big lie the Obama administration uses to show that it's tough on illegal immigration. The claim repeated almost daily in the mainstream media that it holds the record on deportations. Total deportations in 2011, the latest year for which we have complete records, numbered 715,500. That is the lowest year since 1973. Record deportation took place in 2000 under Bill Clinton. The number was 1,864,400. Deportations resulting from interior enforcement, reported by ICE, declined 20% from 2011 and are set to decline when we finally have the figures by another 22% for last year. Even these paltry figures are fake. Obama identifies 2012 as the year his administration broke all previous records. But half of those people supposedly deported were not deported at all. They were removed by the Border Patrol. They were simply arrested at the border and thrown back across. That is not a deportation by any definition, certainly not by a court's definition. The fact, if you want to understand the essence of deportation policy in America right now, you should know that 877,000 people who have been ordered removed are here, and they're not going anywhere. By the way, something as interesting has come out only in the last couple of days, and that is because of this plea by the National Council of La Raza and Aleo and the other organizations pushing amnesty, that Obama's been really so bad, he's been so tough on deportation that the White House finally admitted that's not really true. 65% of all that was border stuff. So we finally got the president saying something honest. You know, he was forced to say something honest. I guess that's good. Now, both parties play along. You guys are like unbelievable. Okay. Can I take you guys home with me? Both parties play along to reward their donors in the corporate service sector and agribusiness with an unending supply of cheap labor and low-skilled labor and to pander to the Mexican vote. The aim, and I'm going to use a very blunt term, the aim is to re-barbarize American capitalism and to take it backward, take it back to 1900. That is to say, these folks would like us to emulate Bangladesh. Why outsource when you can recreate a sweatshop exploitation at home that we can all remember from the turn of the century? The imported cheap labor is used as a tool to drop wages and worsen working conditions for all Americans, further enriching very wealthy execs, at the same time making the American dream forever unattainable for most working class and working poor Americans, with African American males suffering very, very badly as a result of this, and young workers across the board who cannot enter the workforce. You know, these kids who are in tremendous debt for their college educations who can't find a job and are living at home. It's absolutely unbelievable. Flooding the loosest labor market since the Great Depression with millions of low-skilled workers is immoral, and it is socially toxic. Amnesty would also widen the growing disparity in wealth between the very rich and the rest of us, create a permanent underclass feeding social antagonism and social pathology. The bill grants immediate work authorization to illegal aliens and vastly increases future immigration. The CBO, get this, I mean, these numbers really are resonant. The CBO estimates the bill would grant residency to 46 million low-skilled workers, an additional by 2033. It also predicts wages would fall across the board for the next 20 years, and unemployment would rise, and per capita income would be down, per capita GDP would be lower for 25 years. Why are we doing this? To bring more people in. Why are we hurting our own people? Farcical recent immigration policy is very easy to encapsulate. There's a wonderful quote, sometimes attributed to the long-departed GOP Senate leader, Everett Dirksen of Illinois, sometimes to the conservative journalist Stanton Evans, and this is the quote. It says, there are two parties in Washington, the stupid party and the evil party. Every once in a while, the stupid party and the evil party get together and do something that is both stupid and evil. In Washington, that is called bipartisanship. For the Democrats, this bill is smart politics. For Republicans, it's monumentally stupid. I mean, there's a reason why the Republicans are called the stupid party. But forgive me. I mean, the GOP support stems from its leadership's total misreading of the last presidential election and their inaccurate stereotypes about Hispanics.
Right.
Obama, so the thesis goes, won the election because he carried the lion's share of the Hispanic vote. This caused, I was in Texas right after, speaking to groups all over, it was funny to watch people panicking. They were like lemmings, crazed lemmings, heading over a waterfall somewhere. You know, the world had ended. We've got to get out and get Hispanics now, you know, yesterday. And they leapt to two false conclusions. One, that they have to make big inroads into the Hispanic vote, and the way to do it is through immigration policy. There's irrefutable data showing how wrong both of these conclusions are, but Republicans don't want to be confused by the facts. Census Bureau findings showing how key demographics voted and excellent survey data from the Pew Hispanic Center should have laid all of this nonsense to rest months ago. Romney did not lose because of Hispanics. They voted as usual at the lowest percentage rate of any racial, ethnic, or cultural group in America, and fewer did in 2012 than they did in 2008. But two unanticipated events were very important and decisive. The African American vote for Obama was higher the second time around. No one anticipated that. By fully 4 points. And by the way, this was an election that was decided by 2.61 points. African American vote by itself would have accounted for this. But something far more important took place. And that is, for the first time in American history, a higher percentage of blacks voted than whites. 6 million white American Christians, most reliably Republican, stayed home. These folks were from the Northeast, Midwest, and Southwest. Most fit the profile of working-class Reagan Democrats, or more recently, say, Ross Perot supporters. An upper-crusty corporate money manager like Romney just wasn't a natural fit for them. Romney could have split or even carried the Hispanic vote, but with 6 million whites not voting, he still would have lost the election. If whites had turned out in 2012 as they had in 2008, Romney would be president right now. The GOP had better learn something pronto. It is never going to get the Hispanic vote. And it's got nothing to do with immigration, which merely reflects a deeper divide. In fact, Hispanics themselves rate immigration way down in terms of their policy priorities. In fact, 77% of Hispanics don't want more immigration, because when you're holding on to the bottom rung of the ladder, economic and socially, you don't want to be swept off by another wave of immigration. The problem is that Hispanics are the most left-wing of all demographics. I should say, forgive me, Mexicans are the most left-wing of all demographics. Only 32% have a favorable view of capitalism. That's according to the Pew Hispanic Center. 70% are or lean Democrat. 81% want a huge welfare state dispensing ever more entitlements. In Mexico, that kind of politics is called clientismo. Only 41% of other Americans agree with these ideas. Hispanics also, GOP myths notwithstanding, they are not social conservatives. Hispanics support gay marriage at a higher level than other Americans. In fact, the only issue on which Hispanics are more, quote-unquote, conservative than other Americans is abortion. And acculturation is already dropping the distinction between Hispanics, Mexicans and other Americans. Even when Republicans support amnesty and higher immigration, it doesn't translate into Hispanic votes. Think about this. Okay, Reagan passed IRPA. I don't know, he was out of his mind when he did it. He started this whole miserable situation by essentially amnestying almost 4 million people. But what happened when George H. Walker Bush started? I mean, his successor got 29%.
Right.
That was the prize he got that was the thank you from the Hispanic community. John McCain, author of the McCain-Kennedy bill of 1639, that would have destroyed this country forever with its massive amnesty. He got 30%, and George W. Bush got 40%. That's the high in his, by the way, not 44, which people like to say, 40. Now, pretty lousy. An amnesty and huge increase in immigration by family unification, granting, say, 46 million more green cards over the next decade. I don't know if you realize this bill would allow deported aliens to return. You know how hard it is to get someone deported? And we're going to let them come back? I mean, are we completely nuts? Supposed temporary guest workers can apply for resident provisional immigrant status. So even the guests will become citizens. This makes a mockery of all guest worker programs. What it means is an exponential increase in a constituency that will make the Democratic Party the permanent ruling party in America. It will make the Democrats the Dupree of the United States.
Right.
All America will become California, and the GOP will wither and die. The center of American politics will lurch far to the left. Republicans that support amnesty are psychotic, so greedy as to be politically blind or just stupid. Another problem is the price tag. Spending a king's ransom for politically motivated discretionary spending to support people that shouldn't be here in the first place is going to devastate the economy. Robert Rector is probably the best number cruncher in public policy in America. He estimates the cost of this over the lifetime of just the 12 million at $4 to $6 trillion. If you've been in the immigration battle for a long time, you understand that amnesty has never really been the heart of the battle. In Washington, they call amnesty a weapon of mass distraction. The real center of the issue is the legal immigration, massive legal immigration that amnesty will engender. The bill's supporters tried dismissing Rector's report. They claimed it doesn't take account of their latest buzz phrase, quote-unquote, dynamic scoring. This is a flip theory advanced in a very short article without footnotes by Douglas Holt Eakin, a GOP biggie. He was treasurer of McCain's campaign. This unproven thesis argues that immigration creates a bigger economy which will somehow cause behavioral change which will promote higher productivity. This is pure wish fulfillment and question evasion. At its center is a huge gaping hole. It cites no data or analysis regarding immigration as a net contributor to GDP or the fiscal impact of amnesty. There's no discussion of the taxes paid as against the public benefits received by immigrants in general and illegal aliens in particular, and it's the discrepancy between the two that's the heart of the matter. There's mountains of data about this, including that from the nation's premier immigration economist, George Borjas, who has a chair at Harvard's Kennedy School. And by the way, everyone in this business knows Borjas is the best, including the Wall Street Journal. In a recent paper, Borjas says, immigration makes the economy marginally larger, but all of the increase accrues to the workers, the immigrants themselves, for their labor services. Quote, I'm quoting Borjas, immigrants make the aggregate economy slightly larger, but the net benefit accruing to natives amounts to 0.2% of GDP. That's it. Now these tiny gains, and this is important to stress, come at a catastrophic social cost and represent a massive redistribution of income. The losers, and this is the point we have to always keep in mind, immigration is a zero-sum game. There are winners and there are losers. That's the way it works. The losers are the least educated, poorest Americans working. When their income falls, they have to make use of more expensive government services. Moreover, let's look at it in moral terms, the losers are our own worst-off fellow Americans. And I would have thought that Judeo-Christian ethics teach us that charity begins at home. The most comprehensive analysis of the impact of immigration is something the National Academy of Science did. A magisterial, anyone who's, again, in the immigration game knows this is the gospel. It's a magisterial 15-year longitudinal study. It was published in 1997, by the way. I mentioned the year because had that study gone on, what it would have reported would have been much worse than I'm even going to tell you, because it was 2000 to 2010 was the single highest decade in all of U.S. immigration history. So this report stopped before that happened. The chief impact of immigration is to transfer income from America's working poor to immigrants. That's it. It also estimates the economic benefit of redistribution, the same as Borjas came up with, 1 to 0.2% for natives. Ray, the crazy theory by Holtz Eakin, Ann Coulter had a very good line. She said, I love this theory. It's so nifty. It's so fun because it's so counterintuitive. She said, if adding lots of uneducated, low-skilled workers makes an economy richer, that's probably why Haiti is the economic powerhouse that it is. Now, defenders of S-744 or the GOP House standards falsely claim that immigration is a net job creator for natives. Nothing could be more false. For the last 13 years, we've seen year after year after year, large-scale immigration goes hand in hand with weak job growth and persistently high rates of unemployment among the native one. The bottom line is this. Immigration laws are malleable, but the law of supply and demand is immutable. It just is. You throw more and more and more people in at a low level of skill and the wages go down, everything goes down. Hang in there, I'm coming to the end. Amnesty before border security is the most blatant outrage, but there's more. Remember all those rigorous triggers that Senator Rubio, Stout's honor, solemnly promised the nation's leading conservative radio hosts? Remember? Remember that guy Rubio? You know, for a while he looked so good. Anyway, before we found out he was a blatant liar. Tough enforcement would solve all the problems of the past. Amnesty recipients wouldn't get green cards until a set of strict triggers were met. First of all, full operational control of the border, certifiable by DHS through a bona fide set of, remember that word, metrics. You've seen that word, metrics. Huh? There wouldn't be a special pathway to citizenship for illegal aliens. They'd go back to the end of the line behind the suckers who waited for years to do it honestly. Impressive fines and back taxes would attest to the arduous nature of the route to earned legalization. Illegal aliens wouldn't receive taxpayer-funded benefits, that is to say no welfare, and they'd have to learn English. Surprise! When the bill was released, all of Rubio's safeguards were conspicuous by their absence. The only trigger is submission to Congress by the DHS of a border security plan. They're just puzzling off a shelf. They probably have 100 of them sitting there. They probably hire, kids who just graduated with a sociology degree last year from, Podunk State, and they just write another one and pull it off the shelf. An offensive plan, nothing concrete for years, within 6 months of the bill's passage. And amnesty follows then immediately. The 1,200-page final version of the bill has all the gizmos in there, but all the triggers are out. The bill grants illegal aliens immediate work authorization, legal Social Security accounts, and driver's licenses. All this in exchange for a promissory note to the American people about future border security and future enforcement from a morally bankrupt government agency that has spent all of its time trying to gut them. Should the paper scheme come up short after 5 years, DHS punts to a border commission. But that border commission will not be comprised, as we were promised by Senator Schumer, it would, by border state governors and border state law enforcement. It's going to be comprised of Washington insiders tied to the executive branch. My guess is that the reason that they couldn't deal with the idea of border state governors, they just keep thinking of that horrible Jan Brewer. She scared the wits out of them. If I could clone Jan Brewer, God, I would do it. Jan Brewer and Jeff Sessions, we'd be in good shape. If the border commission fails, this Washington insider things, it gets punted somewhere. We don't know where. There is no arduous pathway. It is amnesty, pure and simple. Legalized aliens are not required to pay any back taxes, no matter how much the amount, unless there is a property lien, and tell me how many illegal aliens you think own property. The fines and penalties average $7 a month, and they can be waived at the discretion of the Department of Homeland Security. If an illegal alien has ever received government welfare, all fines are waived. Now, what does that do? That frees 71% of all illegal families from paying fines, since they are on one or two major welfare programs for food stamps and Medicare for their children. But the money goes to the families, so they get a free ride, okay? There's also the misleadingly labeled fine of $600. It's actually a filing fee, no different than that would be paid by any person undergoing the immigration process. But of course, welfare exemption covers that too, and if it doesn't, there's a nice layaway plan. You can pay from the comfort, and what do they say in all those ads? The comfort and security of your home, and send these things in, I don't know, $329 a month forever. Past crimes, including identity theft, using forged documents, lying to police and federal agents, domestic violence, membership in a drug gang, drunken driving convictions, Thousands of Americans have been killed and maimed by illegal aliens behind the wheel. Vandalism, non-payment of taxes, and I love this one. Any number of misdemeanors count as one. Hey, I mean, I would rush out like a maniac, you know, and just do like 100, 200, 300, see how many I can get done. How many misdemeanors, you know, just look under misdemeanors, see what things look most interesting, go out and do it. An American found guilty of some or all of these offenses would spend a great deal of time in jail and pay hefty fines, as they ought to. Raise the English language requirement. After 10 years of legal residency, all you have to do is make the unsupported claim that you are in or you are about to enroll in an English language class. This sounds like something that Jesse from Breaking Bad would say, you know? Yeah, I'm going to enroll next week or something. Okay. Membership in a violent drug gang is also not a problem. And by the way, this is really a serious issue. I'm reading a major study of the cartels, so I've been asked to write a review of it, by George Grayson, who's made 200 trips to Mexico as he's written this book. The Zetas have like a junior Zetas here. Okay? I mean, the Gulf Cartel, the Sinaloas have young people here who are doing stuff for them. So, in many cases, these gang members may have been involved in murder, maiming, theft, torture, okay? Same kind of stuff that they do in Mexico. What the gang member has to do is verbally renounce membership. Now, it doesn't even say to whom. Can you say it to your mirror? Can you say it to your pit bull? Can you say it to your meth supplier? Can you say it to the headstone of someone you killed? I will no longer be a member of Los Zetas. Okay? And then there is an incredible gift to terrorists. And this is really mind-boggling. No in-person interview is required to verify identity. All can be done by mail. So there is no way to ascertain whether Alfredo Sanchez Loera is in fact a Mexican bricklayer and a good family guy, or is an Islamist killer from Libya. Chris Crane, president of the ICE union, says there are no background checks in this system, just rubber stamps. Look, if the FBI and the CIA couldn't stop the Boston Marathon terrorists, despite being tipped off by the Russians, and by the way, despite interviewing both of them, how safe are we? This list, by the way, barely scratches the surface, but it's sufficiently indicative of the kind of policy that gets produced when legislators are driven only by greed and by the lust for power. If comprehensive immigration reform passes, we will lose our political liberty and become a one-party state. We will watch our nation balkanize along ethnic and cultural lines and lose its social cohesion as we witness what is in essence a population transfer from another country with a different language and political culture, which will become the dominant demographic in this country. We will witness the erosion of the middle class and the emergence of a vast, restive, permanent underclass. We will watch the Constitution become a dead letter as the rule of law is overthrown. We can stop this. We must stop this. And we can't count on anyone else. There's a quote by a great rabbi who lived at Jesus' time, Rabbi Akiva. He told his students, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" Anyway, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Does anybody have any, are you open to questions? Does anybody have any questions? I've got a question for you, yeah. I do have a question. We all know, everybody here knows we're at war. We are under attack. Now what would happen with the federal government, what would happen if the state of Texas, the Texas militia just decided to heck with the federal government, put our militia on the border, and started taking care of our own borders? Would the federal government come after us?
Yeah.
Or would they actually bring in the military to do it?
I believe they
So
were
they
doing
would go to war with their own, with their own people.
That's
To
correct.
keep these.
It's what, I mean, obviously, talking about the same context, but also don't be offended.
No.
If you think what happened, say, in the South during desegregation, when governors who wanted to prevent integration used National Guard, the federal government sent the 101st Airborne Division out.
Right.
What I'm telling you right now is that if Texas militia, in Washington language, takes the law into its own hands, that is to say, tries to enforce the law that the federal government will not enforce, right? The federal government will send the United States Army into Texas and disarm you violently or non-violently. They will not permit it. They will regard it as an act of sedition. I'm not saying it in a supportive way. I'm saying there's no other path that they would take. And the situation is dire. There are some small good signs. Small good signs. If you followed that recent special election in Pinellas County, Florida, that Jolie won, he took a firm anti-illegal immigration stance in a swing county with a significant Hispanic population, a county that voted for Obama twice. Again, that recent survey that Numbers USA put out, about the 2/3, I think what's going to happen is what happened last time. When I'm saying last time, 2007. The more the American people are awakened, and that's why it's so important that we all get to work, the more they look at this stuff, the angrier they get. I remember that week, the week in June, back in 2007, the bill was voted on the 28th. It's a Thursday. I live in New York, but I come down to Washington to testify before Congress, to lobby on the Hill, very often. That week, everybody, there's only two of us who don't live in D.C. I and my colleague Jessica Vaughn, who lives outside of Boston. And she's kind of our law enforcement expert. So everybody was in D.C. We were going crazy. Tuesday of that week, we only had 33 votes. And not enough to stop what we needed. Harry Reid wanted a vote of cloture to end debate and to move to pass this legislation. What happened was, it was more than anything else talk radio, to be very blunt. They kept being out there and telling the American people what was going on. And I remember, by the end of that week, we had 55 votes, by the way, and there are a couple of interesting things about this. That was enough to stop Harry Reid. The other thing that's interesting is, when we looked later and did some studying and produced a couple of little research articles, what did everybody who switched votes in both political parties have in common? They were all up for election in 2008. They know the American people hate this stuff. They try to do this sometimes in off years, but what you've got to do is really, there are lists, I know, that we have, that have every member of Congress from Texas on it with their contact information. The worst thing anybody can ever do is undervalue or underestimate your power to make a change. I always tell Roy Beck of Numbers USA, we're old buddies, I'm his best foot soldier because I am on the phone probably every single day, faking an accent, calling from some district, and I find out what the area code is and the zip code, and I call. And by the way, a lot of times I will call people, key people, doesn't matter if you're from their state, if they're the chair of, say, let's say Congressman Goodlatte, chair of the Judiciary Committee. Boy, I wish we had Lamar Smith back there. I don't know what happened, but Goodlatte's a much weaker character. But I would call, people who are critical in this decision, call them. And what happens is the same thing. You call, and you say, you're saying, and you listen to some nasty 22-year-old on the other end of the line, thank you for your comment, screw you, Charlie, whatever. But you know what? After they said, thank you for your comment, drop dead, I hope your children die of disease, the whole thing, they write down 500 votes. A call really counts. Calls count, faxes count, emails count. These people, the one thing that it's really important to understand, and I know you understand it. Just the chats that I've had with you, it's really been a pleasure to be here. You folks are in the Tea Party, you folks, because you have principles, because you care about things, because you don't want to just lead a meaningless life. Most of the people in Congress are not very spectacular. They are, as they used to say, who was it used to say that they are, in Lake Wobegon, they're just a little bit above average. Okay? The main thing they've got going is an enormous amount of narcissism and desire to enrich themselves through their government connections. The only principle they are fiercely devoted to is their own incumbency. And you have to make them afraid of you. You've got to make them really scared, and you can. And you can, when you call up and you use the tone, you say, I will do everything in my power to see that you are not elected. If you take this position, you're going to throw America out. They get a few hundred calls like that, they start getting shaky. These people are not, for the most part, very courageous, and they're not, for the most part, very bright. One of the most disappointing experiences I ever had was the first time I testified before a congressional committee. Judiciary Committee of the House, and typical, this is a Democrat majority, so Democrats had 8 witnesses. It was just me and my friend Jim Edwards, just 2 of us. And of course, all the questions went to the others. Nothing really to us. We just sort of sat there, and they were just such morons and deadheads, and they seemed senile. And none of them would even know what to say or ask if they didn't have their legislative assistants handing them notes.
Yeah.
It was just terrible. And I remember, 3 of my colleagues came along, just to be nice. And one of them, at the bottom of Capitol Hill, there's that Hotel the Dubliners, and there's a great Irish bar there. And he said, you're going to need at least 4 Guinnesses to get, just to survive, to get back to the office. Because, when you finish testifying before Congress, you believe that monarchy would be better. Monarchy or anarchy or something. These people are just hopeless. But, when you call, you can outsmart them every time. They're not bright, and they're scared. They really want that job. They really want that job. And you're in a position to take it away from them. So, I know you've got those lists. Of course, it's not the only thing to do. But, the other thing, and I'm trying to think, it was actually, it was Jean Hall who mentioned this to me. It was something that I'm not sure if it was a member of this Tea Party group or another, an idea that they had come up with, which I thought was absolutely terrific. And that is, get questionnaires to the candidates, asking them a series of very tough and clear questions on immigration policy, and publish the answers on the social media.
Yep.
And if they refuse to answer, put refused to answer. But if you can get some dough together and take out an ad in the local paper, reporting on what they've said, they have to be held accountable. What happens again and again, you know this. None of you guys is going to vote for a Democrat, and I can't imagine myself ever doing that, okay? But they think they have you, just by virtue of being a Republican.
Right, that's true.
Obviously they don't, because you actually believe things. They don't believe in anything. But they shouldn't take that for granted. And you can, as I say, I really think it's critical, because they will talk the talk, and they will never walk the walk.
Right.
And they were going to pretend to be conservatives, and they're not.
Right.
They're just hangers-on. But I think it's critical to find mechanisms to get them on the record And if they won't go on the record, that's also important. And again, if you can get it out in the local newspaper, if you can get a sign over a highway, if you can put it out on Facebook, on any of those things, I think you can really do some damage. And I think then they're going to start getting scared. You've got to hit them in a whole lot of ways they're not expecting. Then they're going to start getting off balance. And as I said, the more voters know about immigration stuff, the angrier they get. And I think voters are going to get very, very angry again this time. Because things are lousy, and I think they understand instinctively that this is hideous. And what's interesting, final point. I always get. I mean, I have the great joy. I mean, I like New York, but politically speaking, it's living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I'm kind of like a freak. I'm not. My girlfriends are like, I'm not allowed to talk at parties. Don't talk about politics, Stephen. Talk about something else. That's what I do. Anyway, so I listen to all of these morons all the time. And my congressman is Charles Rangel.
Oh man, Jennifer Guinness.
You know who my mayor is, De Blasio. Charlie Schumer is my senator. The man is just dripping grease and oil. It was absolutely hideous. So it's just, trying to keep your soul together is not easy. I'm sorry?
Our senator Stickford, by the way. We put him there.
So, yeah, it's tough. But, things are bad, and here's the point I want to make. I'm not just being silly. But one of the things that I hear all the time from, these politically correct people, some of them, by the way, very nice. I just wish they would shut up. But anyway, they all want to believe that you guys are racists, and that you guys are hideous reactionaries, and Tea Party people must be crazy, reactionary, whatever. And racism is really what drives the anti-immigration, or the lower. By the way, I'm not anti-immigration. I believe in immigration at a lower level, and I want the best and the brightest.
Right.
Okay. I don't want. We have 70 million Americans with only a high school education. They're having enough trouble right now adjusting to a different kind of economy. They don't need more problems. But the fact of the matter is that the people's positions on immigration has nothing to do with bigotry. And I just want to mention this one book because it was very consoling to me. There's a liberal sociologist at Boston University, Alan Wolf, but he wrote a book called One Nation After All. And the way he did this book is, he did focus groups all around the country, hundreds of focus groups, and he threw, all the culture wars issues at them. Gay marriage, blah, 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 all right? Freedom of expression, you name it. Immigration. And he reports in the book that he found no trace of bigotry in the anti-immigration movement. He said, Americans love immigration. He said, unless you're African American and which were brought here involuntarily, or you come from a settler family, you have the distinction of having been here and been one, people who fought the revolution and did those spectacular things, or you're a Native American, you're an immigrant. At some point or another, your family came to this country. And immigration history is cherished history by the American people. But we don't like illegal immigration.
Right.
That's the distinction. And Americans don't like it because of who the immigrants are. They couldn't care less. What they don't like is people who cheat the system. They don't like people who break rules. They don't like people who push to the front of the line. It's about fairness. Americans have a very strong sense of fairness. And the notion that Americans have, and he pushed this point in his book, is that we live in an incredibly diverse country. Religiously, ethnically, culturally, and for the most part it really works. And it works because we decided at some point instinctively or explicitly, that we were all going to kind of wait our turn in the line. We're going to wait. We're going to work it out in such a way that, you know, we can promote social peace through a kind of basic notion of fairness. And he said that's what he believes is driving this and driving the strong opposition to illegal immigration. It's not about immigration. It's not about bigotry. In fact, if you almost none of the surveys find any anti-Hispanic feeling. By the way, anti-Semitism and racism against blacks way, way higher. So it's not an issue. It just isn't. And don't let anybody try to game you on that one, because it's a standard device that they use to try to throw us back and to feel somehow there's something wrong with us, that we have to feel guilty about believing in the rule of law. You know, I think we have right on our side, and I think caring. I mean, what brings me primarily to this issue is my concern about justice for my fellow Americans, and for the rule of law. So, anyway, thanks. Yes.
Quick question. Which is the quicker ticking time bomb? The illegal immigration through basically just amnesty, the Muslim infiltration through radicals crossing the border?
Which is the greater
ticking time bomb for us?
Well, good question. I would say that they represent dangers, each in its own way, that are almost equal in their potential to be deeply harmful. I mean, Western Europe is going, if not gone. I don't know what on earth we can do about Muslim immigration. I really don't. I mean, if I had my druthers, we would bring back something like the McCarran Act in the 50s, which barred communists and fascists on the grounds that they believe in things that are subversive to the Constitution. Muslims believe in things that are subversive to the Constitution. And we know that. We know that from their own writing, and we know that from the Holy Land trial in Dallas in 2008. All of their organizations signing a document that said we will destroy their evil house from inside. Okay? And by the way, as you know, the people who are signatories of that document have been welcomed into the White House.
Yes, I know.
You know, I've been honored. You know, this is an administration that seems to despise our friends and love our enemies. But it's a grave danger. I mean, I think Islam is not so much a religion as a rather hideous totalitarian political creed looking for world supremacy. And the saving grace there is the numbers, at least up to now, have been relatively low. But of course, the capacity to do great damage is still there. I mean, it only took, 18 people to destroy the World Trade Center. But given the political correctness of our culture, I mean, think about it. You know, I'm sure you've had experiences here with people who have come to raise the hue and cry about Muslim immigration, whether Pamela Geller or whatever, and they get refused rooms at hotels. In fact, the hotel I'm staying in refused her a room. It's a very tough thing. I mean, I know a lot of these people. Stephen Emerson is a very close friend. So is Frank Gaffney. These guys get called racists and all the rest by a pack of jackals. But as I say, I don't know what you do. What seems to be obvious, and we don't do it, is recognizing our experience. Why don't we at least demand that people who seek visas, and quite frankly, I don't care if it's come for a family visit to Detroit, or whether it's to seek to come to live here, are not subjected to background checks by the investigative agencies of our government, like the CIA, like the NSA. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, there was a period of time, I'm sorry, I'll get to you in just a second. You know, in Saudi Arabia, travel agencies were doing the interviews. I mean, it's madness. I mean, And we're just allowing this to go on.
You know, you bring up an interesting point. This is what I try to talk to. When I talk to people about our immigration problem, I've traveled all over the world. My visas were not correct. I was not allowed entry in the country. If I didn't have a passport, I wasn't getting into that country. They ran background checks on me before I could ever go into another country. So why, the United States is the only country that does not do that anymore. They used to, but somewhere along the lines we forgot what we were doing.
It's unbelievable.
You're right, it is.
I lived in England. I lived in England for 7 years. Okay, I did my graduate work there, and then I taught. But when I was a graduate student, my visa stipulated that I could not work. Also, the British government said they had twice a year I had to report to the local police station so that they could verify who I was, where I was, and it struck me as perfectly reasonable that I was not violating the terms of my visa. Then that changed when I worked, which I went to a transport house and they did all the right stuff. We don't do this. It's simply unbelievable. And it's not just that it's almost consciously terrible. Let me give you an example. I mentioned this guy, Jet Johnson, who now runs DHS, who has as much qualification to do that as I have to be a Navy SEAL. All right, maybe less. Okay, at least I can swim. All right. And I like SEALs. Anyway, his predecessor, the guy he beat out for this job, and only slightly, and I think he got it because he was black and the other guy was Hispanic, to tell you the truth. But the other guy is Alejandro Mayorkas, guy who runs USCIS, which is the old Immigration Naturalization Service, the old INS. It's the body that gives visas. The scandals that went on in the USCIS under his leadership, this man should be serving time in prison right now rather than having been considered to head DHS. We give press awards every year to reporters who break stories on immigration stuff, and they're usually stories that can only come from whistleblowers. When this guy took over, when Alejandro Mayorkas took over USCIS, he established a motto, and it was, "Get to yes." Get to yes. The professionals in that agency who wanted to do diligent background checks were demoted, transferred. The main office is in San Francisco. They were sent to Nebraska, which is, pretty close to hell. No offense if you're from Nebraska, but it's kind of flat and ugly. But not a whole lot happens there, which is why everybody's alcoholic. Anyway, so you were demoted, transferred, sanctioned, and finally it was so bad that the Inspector General for the federal government came in and sort of took control of that agency to try to sort some stuff out. Now he's back. He's back there. So that people were literally punished for trying to do their jobs. And this is, I think, one of the most fundamental problems. It's not, our border agents, for the most part, are terrific. I happen to know a lot of ICE agents. They are terrific people. I don't doubt the people trying to do the job at USCIS were professionals with a high sense of motivation, but they are being blocked and killed by the political level. By the political level in these agencies. And it's the political culture of this administration and others that have allowed this to happen. And I don't know how you begin. I mean, I was hoping that with this Inspector General's report, Mayorkas would have been thrown out. But he's, again, not only is he there, but he was considered for a higher position. We are under threat. There are people out there who want to destroy. I don't know where that jetliner is right now. Probably Pakistan.
We know where it's at.
I don't know where it's going to be flying next. But But the fact is, this is a very dangerous world. And getting into this country is terrifyingly easy. We sponsor, one of the things we do for some of our donors, is we take them on border tours. And we get, off-road vehicles, and we have a couple of really good guys who know the stuff, some ex-border guys, and one of my colleagues, Jerry Cameron, has a Pulitzer Prize. He was for 17 years with the Arizona Republic. And we've taken the tours mostly in Arizona. This year they went to South Texas, the Eagle Pass area. And one of the people who came on this trip was rather unusual, was an immigration lawyer. This, by the way, is a very low form of life. If you don't know it, it's immigration lawyers are sort of, I don't know, they're between anteaters and, I don't know, I mean, they're really vile. One thing about an immigration lawyer instantly is they graduated probably at the bottom of their law school class. And they're all liars.
We had one run for senator.
They make their money by promising desperate people things that they can't give them. Anyway, it's a wonderful way to make a living. But this immigration lawyer came on the trip. And there they were in the Eagle Pass area. And she said, there's nobody here. And that's right. There ain't anybody there. And in whole stretches of Arizona, you could look the whole vista, and there's no fence. There are no patrols. There's no nothing. Remember, we were promised a Secure Fence Act in 2006. Remember, double row wire fence. How long it goes 35 miles. We need a wall. We literally need the Great Wall of China there. And people say, why are there no longer any suicide bombings in Jerusalem? The Israelis built a wall, a very high one. Okay? And I love these, they say, oh, how can you do it? And, meanwhile, they're all crazy about these virtual, drones and sensors. And I'm thinking, I grew up in northern New Jersey, in Sopranos country, and I don't know, probably half of my friends were Italian American, and almost all their dads were in construction. And I'm thinking most of their dads are probably now like 80, 90 years old. Doesn't matter. These guys will work forever. They know everything. So I would say, get some Hercules transports and fly in a whole bunch of old Italian guys from New Jersey. Give them bricks and mortar. It'll come in under cost. They'll get it done in 3 months. And the problem, you give it to a federal agency, right? It's going to cost $29 billion. It'll never get done. We need to militarize the border, and we need wall.
Is there actually anything the states can do? I mean, they talk about all the time that the federal government's not doing their job, we're going to do it, and they're running all these platforms. Are they actually going to be able to do anything? And do you know anybody?
Well, you saw the problem. No, you saw the problem that happened when Arizona passed SB 1070. After years, there was a period of time when 4,000 people a day were walking into the state of Arizona, and that's, by the way, when Janet Napolitano was governor. Mm-hmm. And for making the citizens of Arizona live with that. And by the way, there was an enormous amount of crime, property damage, rape, you name it, going on in Arizona. So they passed this law. Now, the Supreme Court upheld parts and didn't uphold other parts. And of course, the main opponent of the bill was the federal government and our wonderful Attorney General. And this is going to be the case again and again and again. But I do think that I think that every border state should follow the example of Arizona, seek to pass its own legislation. I'm a federalist. I have the power to come down. It's because, I'm sorry?
We can't build the fence for them, right?
No.
Is that possible?
Well, if you can pass legislation, and my argument is, start building and see what happens. Yeah. It was for example, there's this idiotic thing with the Arizona law. And by the way, we just received, I had to deal with this, which was pretty funny. We got subpoenaed. All the people working in my organization were subpoenaed by the ACLU to produce any document that we had from all of our emails. I have 40 billion, any email, any communication you had with any person serving in an official capacity in the state of Arizona. Because what they were looking to find is any word that suggested racial profiling or any, any kind of hostile language or stereotyped language by Hispanics. Well, you wouldn't find that in anything that we ever wrote, and most of us never did it. But I mean, they're trying to come back and undo more of that law. But my feeling is, the thing about the racial profiling, and the court, by the way, gave they didn't give Arizona as much leeway as they should have. And Arizona's argument, I think, was an absolutely clear one. I mean, Chris Kobach argued this case. Chris Kobach, one of the best lawyers in America. And he said, why don't we pass the bill? If racial profiling happens, then bring a case. Bring a case. If you have substantial proof that there's racial profiling, bring a case and undo the law. It's very clear we need a law. We have our state, the border means nothing. Our state is being held hostage, in essence, by thousands and thousands and thousands of illegal aliens. We're trying to do something about it. And by the way, that bill was really, in fact, made bulletproof on the issue of racial profiling, because you just can't pick somebody up because they look Hispanic. By the way, 40% of the population of Arizona is Hispanic. So that would mean you could stop 40% of the population. They had to be doing, first of all, there had to be a violation of the law in the first instance. And then there had to be a secondary reason why you might believe that they were either illegal or involved, or let's say they had 15 people in the back of their SUV, who didn't speak English. Or they were driving around an area of the city that's known for drug dealing, or whatever. But unless you had that first, a clear violation of law, and second, something that might associate it with the problem on immigration, that's about as bulletproof as you can get. But that still wasn't quite good.
So we need to talk to our legislators in Texas about passing laws.
Because the federal government
Sanctuary city
is refusing to. The problem we have is we have a president who refuses to enforce the law. We have a rogue president who's violating the law. Look, the president's he swears the oath. I will faithfully execute the laws. He doesn't. He should be impeached. I mean, it gets very boring. But
well, everything you were saying earlier about our politicians being barely above average, if that, and you use the word moron like 5 or 6 times. Well, we keep re-electing that to our governor. And so he's the one who came out against the Arizona law and said, that kind of law will not work in Texas, cannot work in Texas. And I could tell the minute that he said it that he hadn't read it. Because if he had read it, he would know that it was enforcing immigration law. But we have an interesting situation here in Texas. The majority of our international border with Mexico is private property. And so the difference here that we have with Arizona, which a lot of their border property is state or federal land, in Texas that's private land, that's ranch land or farmland. And so we have a situation where our Texans are literally living in a DMZ, a war zone, but demilitarized, and they're on their own. So we've got not just the border counties, which, as you said, and it's completely accurate, that they're completely infiltrated and compromised, many times with the lure of easy money from the cartels, but many times with the threat of violence that hangs over the heads of their families that are still in Mexico. Many of the Border Patrol agents, law enforcement, deputy sheriffs, all have families still in Mexico. And that threat of violence is what brings them into to the dark side, so to speak. But the situation here is when we've got the illegal trespassing, they're called Charlie Tangos, criminal trespassers, because that's the only way our law enforcement in Texas has of enforcing the laws and detaining the smuggling traffic, the human smuggling traffic, under the guise of criminal trespass, because it's all private property.
I mean, has anybody suggested in the state legislature that, a certain swath of territory be declared like an eminent domain as part of the state of Texas, and yield a swath of land so that the state is responsible?
That is a really good idea.
I mean,
What?
I'm not suggesting the state
Well,
socialize people's private property, but I'm saying, what about 40 yards? The state of Texas, you own that 40
we
yards.
don't have a legislature with the intestinal fortitude or the willpower to take this on, and we have an incredibly powerful business lobby that has killed every piece of E-Verify, anti-sanctuary cities, voter ID legislation that we bring to bear. And even though we have a quote-unquote red legislature with a majority of Republicans, they're useless because the leadership under the auspices of Dewhurst, Perry, and Joe Strauss kill the legislation, and they work together. If it happens to pass the House, which it can rarely ever get out of committee, it's killed in the Senate, the graveyard of all.
I tried, by the way, I had an opportunity to needle your governor, but I couldn't get anything out of him. I was speaking to, I spoke on 4 occasions to a group, wonderful Tea Party group, which unfortunately I think has gone over on immigration, and that's the King Street Patriots. Catherine Engelbrecht was a very good friend. They have totally collapsed on the immigration front. Anyway, I was invited. They were opening up a new headquarters, and so Ted Poe was there, and Congressman Sessions was there, and the draw of the evening was the governor. And I was like, I had 15 minutes to say something before he spoke. And so I remember calling Mark Krikorian. I said, Mark, this is like, there were 1,000 people there. I said, this is a teachable moment. Should I make this a teachable moment, or should I just shut up? Because I'll probably end up making an enemy out of Catherine for the rest of my life. So he said, use it. And so before Governor Perry came out, I said, Governor, I do appreciate the fact that you made at least a symbolic gesture of opposing sanctuary cities, which I understand got nowhere anyway in the legislature. But I said, I would really ask you to consider very seriously making E-Verify mandatory. And there were 1,000 people went nuts cheering.
Right.
And then he came out and he gave me, he's not a bad guy, I guess. But he gave me this look like, thank you, thanks for that. And no, he wouldn't talk about it at all. And I guess there are some people who believe he, with this wide open race, God knows, he could get back into it, I suppose. I don't know. But no, I recognize I do recognize your problems here are very, very serious politically.
Plus, we don't trust them with eminent domain. I wouldn't trust them with that.
Yeah.
Well, I
It
think
was just off the cuff thought.
No, it sounds good, but
I
they're
just want
already
to
stealing
wrap
our
some
land.
responsibility around something.
Our ranchers and farmers, at least the ones that I've talked to, would agree to some semblance of a security structure because it's their lives and it's their livelihoods at stake. It would be a patchwork though, because some of them are also compromised because they are making money off of the traffic that crosses their land. The ranchers are as well. So you've got compromised deputy sheriffs, you've got compromised ranchers, actual Texans. There are people who are making money off of the flow of human traffic. And just so that you know, this war zone intrudes about 100 miles into Texas. The signage on the distress signals that they have all over the ranch land down there with the blue lights, so that when they run out of water and they need Border Patrol to come and give them a ride to their ultimate destination, they hitch a ride with Border Patrol. They hit these buttons and it's stocked with water so that they're not dying of thirst out there, which happens frequently. The signs are in 3 languages. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Well, you can guess what the first two are, but do you know what the third one is?
Chinese, I don't know.
Yes, Mandarin Chinese. That's the amount of traffic that is flowing over the Texas border where the distress signage is in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. And I've seen them with my own eyes. I'm a Texas border volunteer, and I have seen them with my own eyes.
No, what you're saying is obviously enormously disturbing, and I know that when you have the folks that you want to count on, you know, or at least a high percentage of them are seriously compromised for any number of reasons. You know, either greed or, as you said, you know, they will be putting relatives of theirs in grave. I mean, we know what the Zetas will do. You know, they cook. There's something called a giso. I mean, they will cook a baby and cut its head off and send you a picture. What they do. I mean, they get their power by doing the most depraved things imaginable. I'm sorry.
Now, my name is Gilberto Gallegos. I'm a fourth generation Tejano Mexican American. I'm not a racist. But I am a realist. I am involved here tonight because I keep seeing the campaign people running for election and no, what I'm getting is I'm against illegal. I'm against amnesty. I'm against this, and I'm a Republican. And I look at that and I go, well, what are you for? I mean, I can be against a lot of these, but which candidate has a plan? You know, Houston, we have a problem. America, we have a problem. What do we tackle first? The 15 million illegals or the border? You ain't seen nothing yet. If we have any kind of reform or promise of a reform,
It's already happening. The more rush is coming to the border now.
Now, I teach English, introductory English, and for a while, citizenship classes at a local big church. And I got, at the year of my tenure, 1 year, they cut me off because I was trying to teach them citizenship classes. They deal with, I wrote down trustworthiness, loyalty, honesty, integrity, rule of law, Constitution, amendments. And
Well, this
shut-
Americanization, that's racist.
They shut me down. They shut me down
It's not
because
politically correct. We don't teach civics anymore.
yeah, no, because they said you can teach them English.
What are you,
Few-
a fascist?
Black or don't. And I said, well, just to make a point is that one of the things we do is we teach them the Pledge of Allegiance. And I was appalled that people that illegal here are struggling and all that how they objected to the pledge. Because I told them, this is a pledge. This is what it means. And you see Mexican Americans or El Salvadorians in parades, not waving the American flag, but there. And I'm struggling because I want to be a good Samaritan, but I also want my kids who don't speak Spanish and are struggling to get jobs. And we've been here 4 generations, from Spanish language when we were here. And crime, And I just want to find out which candidate has a plan, a futuristic plan that says, well, I believe the border should come first. And which one? I know what they're against because you can hear them. I'm against illegals. I'm against. Okay. Get to the root of, how do we address these problems? Which one do we address first?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you very much. You said a whole lot of interesting things. I mean, one thing you touched on, that time being what it is, I mean, it kept you a long, long time anyway. But I mean, one of the things that's really in our way is the sort of informal ideology of the fiscal and political elite in this country now, which is multiculturalism.
Right.
Okay. The notion that when it's a patriot, they look at you as though you're a fascist. Patriotism is bad. American history is hideous. To demand English is chauvinistic. I mean, we've gone crazy. I mean, this country successfully assimilated millions and millions and millions of people from all over the world. In fact,
as a result of the Nationality Act in 1965, our immigration is the least diverse now than it's ever been. It was always infinitely more diverse because we took people from all over the place. Now we've got one country that accounts for 45% of legal immigration and 65% of illegal immigration. It's the exact obverse. So you think what would be a wonderful thing about immigration is by diversifying immigrants, we're bringing ways of knowing from all different parts of the world. We're not simply importing. We already have 20% of Mexico's population here.
Yeah.
What do we want? 40%? I mean, it's crazy. And what you're saying is, when you can't teach civic virtues, which are the basis of the Constitution. It's the mindset of the framers. I mean, it goes back to Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. I mean, you can't even do that stuff. I mean, we as a culture have completely lost faith in ourselves. I think it's both disgusting, despicable, and tragic that we have no faith in who we are anymore. We also lost. One thing is, we were talking about this in the car earlier, Pedro and I, that a lot of institutions that used to promote greater assimilation have simply died out. For example, the ethnic organizations, big ethnic there's not a single mass membership organization in the Hispanic community, not one. Okay, as I said, there are all these little organizations, National Council of La Raza on the left, they're all tiny groups of left-wing people supported by the Ford Foundation, which is also very left-wing. But there's not a single there's nothing like the NAACP, for example. There's nothing like the Urban League. But even those organizations are dying. We used to live at a time when German Americans belonged to Steuben societies, and there were Pulaski societies, the Polish folks belonged to, and these organizations did, and Knights of Columbus for a lot of Italian folks, these things did great work because they didn't do what some people superficially think. They didn't create separation. Every one of those organizations on the American flag, they were organizations to help the passage of immigrants into American life. By maintaining pride in their roots, but also inculcating a new sense of belonging and loyalty to America. Those organizations are all dying out. Their memberships, to the extent that they exist anymore, are aging. Labor unions did the same thing. They brought people together. I'm not getting into the politics of this labor union or that labor union, but the labor union movement, the trades union movement, did something similar. It brought people together. It gave them a sense of unity. People don't belong. We live in a society, what's that wonderful book, Bowling Alone? We don't belong. People don't belong to organizations anymore. They don't take active role in their church life. People don't have to take active role. That's why you guys are wonderful. That's why Tea Parties are so important. Because you are trying to recreate that sense of community around your political ideals, and it creates bonds, civic bonds. We have lost them. We have lost them in so many areas, and we just took them for granted. That we have those things, and they really help knit us together. And I think that this, anyway, I think everything you're saying, I respond to very warmly, and in addition to questions of law and policy, and by the way, I think in terms of whether it's fencing or dealing with the illegal population we have, I think they have to be done simultaneously. You can't do one without the other. They have to be done the same way. And I think in the end, there's really no magic. I think you just enforce the law. And I mean, I'll give you one piece of research that we did. After the term attrition through enforcement comes out of my think tank, that the way you lower the illegal population is through incrementally lowering their numbers by enforcing the law so that they will go home, take themselves home. Nobody, by the way, when I was talking about the Poles being all a bunch of hokum, the Poles would give people on immigration, they would give people two the respondents two choices: deport all or amnesty. Now, nobody believes in mass deportation. No one believes in SWAT teams, thousands of guys in black uniforms loading people onto trains. I mean, that imagery is like Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Russia. And the only people who use that are people who want to promote amnesty because, of course, American people are mostly decent people. And if people say, okay, you've got two choices, mass deportation or amnesty, they hate amnesty because they hate what it means, but mass deportation sounds like Auschwitz, right? So they choose mass deportation. But what if you give them a third option? And that is attrition through enforcement, applying the law. Well, we did a study, a huge study. We got a lot of money from our main donor to do this. And by the way, we divided the study along religious lines because we were interested in watching, because religious leaders, God help me, I mean, find a baseball bat. There'll be a whole lot fewer of them around, but they are, all of them, right across the spectrum, are the leaders of the amnesty movement. From the Conference of Catholic Bishops, to every Jewish organization, to the National Conference of Churches, all of them are all in the same league. But we said, let's do a study that contrasts, because immigration, by the way, has been called the perfect policy storm because no other issue so sharply divides the elites from ordinary Americans. So we know the positions taken by the National Association of Evangelicals, the Southern Baptist Conference, the Board of Rabbis, whatever. Then we asked the parishioners. So we did a survey, and we said, here's three choices: amnesty, mass deportation, attrition through enforcement. 95% of evangelicals chose attrition through enforcement. 92% of mainline Protestants. 89% of Roman Catholics and 78% of Jews. Those are pretty high numbers. I mean, the fact is those rabbis and bishops and pastors don't speak for anybody except themselves, and I wish they would just shut up. Ordinary folks get it. They really do. It's leadership elites, and the leadership elites are a real problem for us. I mean, they wield a lot of power. I don't know how many of you have run across this in your churches.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've been proselyted on this. That we have to be kind and compassionate, and no one is illegal. Bull. What does that mean? I mean, it's crazy.
And they forget about people like these, the victims.
Yeah. I mean, but it's this constant line that you keep getting. That this is the only thing that a moral and decent person would believe. I'm sorry.
On a more positive note, I just wanted to say that my son is a young Army officer, and he's just returned from his third deployment to the Middle East. And he tells me his age group, he's 32, that the age group, say from 25 to 38, 40, that, believe it or not, folks, are wanting to return to patriotism, to buy American, and to create in their minds the type of existence that we all know or have heard about in the 50s.
Right.
And to me, that is an outstanding sign of encouragement, and maybe rather than being so negative on something, maybe we should jump on that, which is the patriotism thing, and encourage them and grow our groups, along those lines, because these are the ones that are raising the new families and stuff. They're also the ones who are struggling,
Right.
finding jobs and stuff like that. But that just was a recent statement that he shared with me, and he's got his troops, that are younger, that he takes care of and is responsible for, and their families as well. And he said, "Mom, I just want you to know." And I'm like, "Whoa!" So.
Hey, Steve, and also, I think one of the problems we had also is bilingual education. When I was growing up, we didn't have bilingual education, right? So you had to learn English, so you had a common language.
And you still, and those that spoke Spanish at home, Vietnamese at home, German and Russian, like where I grew up, they still taught their kids that, and over time, you can share it or not, right? So I think that's one of the, when my son started kindergarten, the first thing they did was put him into a bilingual classroom. The boy did not know Spanish, okay? So there's federal dollars associated with all those programs. And I think that's one of the problems. If we can get rid of that,
Absolutely.
that'd be great.
I couldn't agree more. And this is, by the way, one of those completely counterproductive elitist concepts. What you end up producing are people who are functionally illiterate in both English and Spanish. And by the way, we know from the Pew Hispanic Center that 35% of the folks coming from Mexico are illiterate in Spanish. Okay? They can't read or write Spanish. This is a very serious problem. Now, it's also interesting that this is not, the bilingual thing is a matter of the elites. It's not ordinary Hispanic people. There have been polls done that show that a great majority of Hispanic parents want their kids mainstream.
Right.
They love their kids. They want their kids to succeed, and they understand that success means knowing English. It's the educational elites tied into the foundations, the big foundations, tied into the government, who end up producing this policy, which is completely destructive. It's destructive, obviously, of national unity, but also really hurts the kids cognitively.
Right.
If you don't know English, you're up the creek. And you're right. I mean, nobody made accommodations for the immigrants who came.
Exactly.
My father is an immigrant, okay, came from Russia. There weren't any signs in Russian for him. Nothing. My father came from Russia during the Civil War, the Russian Civil War between the whites and the Bolsheviks in 1921. And the first photograph I have of my dad, this is in the time when we used to have what we call patriotic assimilation. The first photograph of my father is on Ellis Island with two of his brothers, and they have a suitcase. They're wearing rags, and they have a suitcase with ropes around it, and that's picture number one. Picture number two is taken 4 years later. 4 years later. My father is in his tennis whites, standing next to Bill Tilden, who was the greatest tennis player in America at that time, at the University of Alabama, where he went and got a BA. That was in 4 years of acculturation. 4 years. From a village in Russia where they had a dirt floor and a czar to being a tennis star and getting a degree at an American university in English. And he never let us speak anything but English. I'm sorry, in retrospect, I mean, I would have liked to have known Russian. But it was not the value. The value was you learn English. And no accommodations were made. And, of course, there was no welfare. And that made you, you swam or sank. And by the way, there's something else interesting here. Just in case everybody thinks it was the great success story, and then I really should let you guys go home and recover from this. A lot of immigrants went back. This is something that people don't know. 1/3, no, it's higher. I'm sorry, nearly 40% of all the Italians who came to America went back there. That was true of about 30. That was true of about 25 to 30% of the Irish and 25 to 30% of the Germans. Okay, the only group that migrated in one direction were Jews. Why? Because they couldn't. They went back to be killed. They didn't so much immigrate as escape. Okay, so there was nowhere to go back. So they went in one direction, but a lot of immigrants went back to Europe. They came to America because America seemed like a really great idea, and maybe they find a spouse, maybe they get land, maybe they do X, Y, and Z. But if it didn't work out, they could still go home. And so the immigration story, by the way, is also overstated and over-sentimentalized and all the rest. So it wasn't, that everybody stayed and everybody was, it was very complicated. But the fact is, you know, we had what you were talking about before. And previously, we had the institutions and the ideology that promoted patriotic assimilation. People wanted to be, my father wanted nothing so much as to be American.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was too old. My father didn't have to serve in World War II. He was older. He could have gotten out. He was like 5 years older. But he was in the 3rd Marine Division, and they fought in the Pacific because he was an American. And I want to show my loyalty to my country. I can't imagine too many people today wanting to do anything like that. Unfortunately, you know, there's a great deal of universalism. I think it's very thin and meaningless. And I think I'm not looking to you know, give a rebirth to some chauvinistic notion of nationalism and patriotism. Intelligent patriotism? Yeah, to a remarkably exceptional country. We live in an exceptional country. You know, I mean, I feel like, as I've said, the same to somebody else, every day I feel like getting up and kissing the soil. That's how lucky I feel. All the lots in life that I drew, that I could be born in this country. Think about it. Think about how most other people live. It's just chance. I was lucky we were born here. And I'm afraid we're just going to give it away. We're giving.
We've got to have 3 things to be a nation. To be a nation, there's 3 key ingredients to being a nation. First of all, you got to have a culture. You've got to be. Everybody's got to be on the same page. You have to have a language, and you have to have borders. Today, we've lost our culture. We've got schools right now that is against the law or against the school policies for kids to wear American flags to school. They're actually being thrown out of school, or not only American flags, but Second Amendment shirts, anything that has to do with country, they're being thrown out of school. We've got a language problem now. We don't speak English anymore. Now you've got to answer the phone. It's 1 for English, 2 for whatever.
It's crazy.
It's supposed to be a common language. Now that our borders are being destroyed, we can't even guard or protect our own borders anymore because the federal government says it's against the law for us to do so. So we don't have a border anymore. We don't have a language anymore. We're losing our culture. We're losing the 3 things that it takes to define a nation. Right?
That's very well said, and I think, you know, unfortunately, we don't seem to have the confidence to get them back. At least most people don't. You guys do, and you've got to get the message out.
And I'm going to cut it here because of time constraints. So I want to thank Dr. Steve Steinlight. Thank you for coming here, and as Heidi stated earlier in her show, you guys are the ones that make that effort and make this happen. And he is going to be in town tomorrow. He'll be at T-Fire, is holding an event at their location. I think it's the Tracy G facility in Houston. T-Fire?
T-Fire, who's that?
That's a organization, get the acronym, but it's
Texas for
Immigration Reform and Enforcement.
enforcement.
And they're going to be at where?
Do you guys know Larry Corpus?
Yes.
Yeah,
He's
very,
very
great
well.
guy. Yeah. It's at the Tracy G Center tomorrow. I'll put out on Facebook.
Where?
I mean, you're going to get the same thing, but, you know. You can
Yeah.
get through it.
Like on the north side?
I'll try to think of some better jokes.
And then they'll be in Fort Bend County on Thursday.
So Gil,